Well, welcome all. Richard joins us today from Houston, Texas, and he's eager to facilitate this conversation about climate change, as am I, and I'm sure all who are on this meeting today. So Richard acknowledges that 2020, of course, was a very difficult year, but he also believes that this terrible year that we've been through did actually come and introduce to us some unexpected outcomes, and that is the unprecedented acceleration in climate action. And when I first read this, I saw acceleration in climate change, and I'm going, I hope not. And then when I saw this acceleration in climate action, I was very satisfied to see that, and very curious about what that actually means for us all. So allow me to introduce Richard. Richard is, in fact, the chair of our Futures Council in our college, but he's many, many other things. And I'll just give you a short bio here for Richard. Richard received a BS in civil engineering from Rice University and has a master's in urban and environmental planning from the University of Virginia. He currently serves as a director of the Administrative Center for Sustainability and Energy Management for Rice University, where he leads Rice's sustainability program and oversees a team of energy managers and analysts. Richard holds appointments as a professor in the practice of environmental studies in sociology and as an adjunct lecturer in civil and environmental engineering. He has taught over 20 classes at Rice and frequently partners with faculty across the university to support their courses. He is a former president of the board of the Houston Farmers Market, which I've never asked Richard about, but I'd love to explore that perhaps in a separate lecture, and is now the Rice University Farmers Market. Richard is a husband, a father, a foodie, a traveler, and has served as a volunteer public radio DJ for nearly 30 years. So there's another aspect we have to get Richard to tell us more about. He is indeed a man of many parts, and one of them, of course, is being our chair of our college's Futures Council and my advisory group. So I would just say that when we were talking about these lightning talks, it was Richard that came up with this idea. And he said, look, I will be the inaugural deliverer of this lecture. And I'm so pleased that we're starting a new tradition with the Futures Council by having these talks. So thank you very much, Richard. And I look forward to the presentation today and discussion to follow. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. You know, I think my grandmothers would be proud that on St. Patrick's Day, you know, I'm representing the redheads of the world as the guest speaker. You know, as always, thank you for the just very generous and warm introduction. I'm really delighted to be able to address the CAPLA community today. It's really been such an honor to get to know you all over the last few years, and I've even invited some of you to give lectures virtually, of course, here at Rice. And so I've really been made to feel like a member of the extended CAPLA family. And of course, I wish I could be with you in person. But of course, I'm grateful for the technology that links us together virtually today. So just a quick note about format. I'm going to talk for maybe 12 to 15 minutes, and the rest is actually going to be a conversation. So if you're thinking, oh man, I've got to listen to this guy for 45 minutes, no, it's not going to be like that. I'm going to make you participate. So. And hopefully we'll get some great collective comments and wisdom out of that. So let's go ahead and get started. I want to begin with an image from my own campus, the Rice University campus, which, as you all know, is located in Houston. I was walking across the campus on what was really a glorious afternoon when I came across a new public art installation featuring several messages posted like billboards. And of course, my first reaction was how appropriate in a city without zoning that we use a billboard as a point of departure for public art, right? But then I found myself captivated by one message in particular: a better future awaits us. So we're often challenged with binaries like utopia or dystopia, abundance or scarcity, prosperity or collapse. Because on the one hand, at no other point in human history have environmental challenges been so global, so extreme, so intertwined. You need to be alarmed, make no mistake about that. And yet on the other hand, the emergence of so many viable solutions and truly a rising global movement of those who've dedicated themselves to enacting those solutions suggests to some a rosy or at least rosier future. So while it could lead to some definite cognitive dissonance, I encourage you to hold both of these thoughts in your mind as being valid. Now, lest you think I'm being Pollyannish, let me put this photo into context. I had just come from visiting you all in visiting CAPLA in person, which is always energizing, fills me with hope. But the date I took this photo was February 21st, 2020. 3 weeks later, on my birthday, across the planet, the entire world went into a sun-prolonged lockdown due to COVID-19. Happy birthday, Richard. It was hardly on anyone's radar in February, but the virus was growing exponentially, and that growth disrupted life as we knew it just 3 weeks later. So that brings me to my second image for 2020. Now keep in your mind the phrase second image for 2020. So yes, of course, a dumpster fire. And I bet the phrase dumpster fire immediately came to mind for some of you when I said an image for 2020. And since I live in Houston, which is prone to extreme floods, I had to make sure that the flaming dumpster was indeed in floodwaters, because our version of dystopia in Houston involves floods. So you probably weren't feeling very hopeful in late March of 2020. I was scared, and you probably were too. I was worried about, among other things, besides just everyone's health and well-being, I was worried what would happen to the signs of progress, the very tangible signs of progress that we were finally seeing on climate action. In fact, an editorial in the Wall Street Journal in early April of 2020 took what I thought was almost a gleeful tone in declaring corporate sustainability initiatives to be dead. But here's an image that I think more accurately describes what happened. For those of you who were not raised on Star Wars, this is Han Solo making the jump to light speed in his spaceship, the Millennium Falcon. Climate action wasn't dead. To the contrary, it was making the jump to light speed. It accelerated. Let's look at the data to back this up. So there was a report that was published in September of 2020, and it found that between 2019 and just the first 8 months of 2020, carbon neutral commitments by companies tripled. Commitments by cities increased 8-fold, and by regional governments by a factor of 10x. Together, the companies accounted for 14% of world GDP, and the governments accounted for 11% of global population. Hang on just a moment. Okay, sorry about that. So, I mean, this all sounds great, right? Well, buckle up. We're just getting started. What unfolded over the following months in the midst of a global pandemic was truly astonishing. In mid-September, BP, who had speculated back in 2017 that world oil demand might peak in the mid-2040s, announced in fact that it might have already happened, that the demand for oil would never again be as high as it was in 2019. For those of us in the world's energy capital of Houston, this news was an earthquake. And in fact, in today's Wall Street Journal, there was a similar article saying that we may have already peaked for global gasoline usage. September 23rd, the state of Michigan declares its intention to become carbon neutral by 2050. this being the home of auto manufacturing. September 27th, Walmart, the world's largest retailer, sets a carbon neutral goal for 2040, while also announcing bold steps to restore 50 million acres of land and 1 million square miles of ocean by 2030. And I'm starting to see more of these kinds of goals just going beyond carbon neutral to actually trying to be restorative. So that very same day, China, the largest CO2 emitting country in the world, sets a target to become carbon neutral by 2060, but perhaps more importantly, with plans for emissions to peak by no later than 2030. I wish it would happen sooner than that, but that's where it is. October 12th, HSBC, the 7th largest bank in the world, largest bank in Europe, announced that it would devote $1 trillion to finance climate solutions by 2030. So this is indicative of a larger sea change in the flow of money. October 15th, the International Energy Agency proclaims that solar is now, on average, the cheapest electricity on the planet. The price had dropped by a factor of 2,500 over a period of 6 decades, with no sign of that trend abating. In fact, you may have even seen the news that the fourth quarter of 2020 had the most solar installations ever for in the United States. And the US solar industry is predicted to quadruple by 2030. October 26th, Japan, the world's 3rd largest economy behind the US and China, says it plans to become carbon neutral by 2050. The very next day, China says that conventional gas burning cars will be phased out by 2035. Keep in mind that China has the world's largest middle class. Think about what this means for auto manufacturing and for oil companies. This is huge news. And one day later, South Korea announces plans to become carbon neutral by 2050. What a week of news for East Asia. November the 10th, back to the International Energy Agency for a prediction that by 2025, nearly every single watt of electricity added to power grids globally will be from a renewable source. So we're seeing electricity markets absolutely being transformed at lightning speed. In fact, in 2020 in the US, 43% of all new power added to the grid was solar last year. So 1 week later, the Conservative government in the UK and the Prime Minister announces a very specific 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution on their way to become carbon neutral. December 1st, a curious announcement in Singapore, approval for the sale of lab-grown meat. So imagine being able to grow chicken breasts and steaks using actual animal cells, but without killing the animal or requiring the large amounts of land, the associated resource needs and waste that go along with it. You could literally grow a pork tenderloin anywhere, no pigs would suffer. So the implications for global land use and resource use, if this scales, are incredible, because 40% of all habitable land on the face of the earth is used for livestock. 70% of global water use is for meat production alone. That very same day, truly encouraging news from the BBC. The surge in climate commitments, if achieved, were modeled, with the results showing that we're getting increasingly close to the global goals of limiting increases in temperature. December 3rd, the UK issues a very aggressive goal to cut emissions by over 2/3 by the end of the decade. So the immediacy and the speed of this action is critical. This is the 5th largest economy on the planet that we're talking about. The UK is doing a great job already in decarbonizing. The following week, the European Union, consisting of 27 member countries, announces a very similar reduction by 2030. So now, basically, most of the continent of Europe is on a fast track to decarbonize immediately. December 14th, the tiny Vatican City commits to become carbon neutral by 2050. Now, it's only a quarter of the size of the University of Arizona campus in acreage. I get that, small potatoes, but remember, this is the home of the Catholic Church. So what happens in Vatican City could have influence through churches across the world. Over in the city of London, the world's leading insurance market, Lloyd's of London, announced that they will end insurance for all fossil fuel projects by 2030. And more to the point, are ending insurance for coal, tar sands, and Arctic fossil projects by 2022. In other words, immediately. Here, we're seeing the flow of capital away from fossil fuel projects and the growing concern about the risks that they pose. And on a personal note, my father spent much of his career working with Lloyd's brokers to enable fossil fuel projects. So it took my breath away to see this announcement from Lloyd's. And it was a big deal here in Houston. And in the US, for once, some good news out of Washington in 2020, where tucked in the COVID relief bill was a provision that would directly ramp down use and production of HFCs, which is a potent greenhouse gas that's found in refrigeration systems. So the torrent of positive headlines continued into 2021. They still continue now. But at this point, what I've shared is already a lot for you to absorb. I just wanted you to get a sense of what is going on. So at the dawn of 2019, even at the dawn of 2020, I dared not dream so much change could happen in such a short period of time. The last 4 months of 2020 in particular were truly astonishing. With respect to climate action, I think the following quote captures my feelings. There are decades when nothing happens, and then there are weeks where decades happen. Except I think the pace will continue, and that will keep getting faster. The headlines are going to shift in character and in specifics, but they'll keep coming. So as a global social movement for climate action continues to influence hearts and minds, and as a global technological revolution quickens, I do firmly believe that a better future awaits us, but it's on us to choose and to enable that better future and to ensure that it is equitably distributed. What I can say without hesitation is that we are now in an era of profound change, and the change is getting faster and faster. So I want us to talk about what that change might look like. So in a moment, I'm going to ask all of us to think ahead 10 years. But first, just to illustrate the point, I'm going to think back to when I was the age of a typical senior at CAPLA. In my senior year, which was at Rice as an undergraduate, there was no World Wide Web. So I'm dating myself there. If you had email, it likely meant that you were in a computer programming class. I would guess that at that time, maybe 10% of students at my university had their own computer in their dorm room at that point. If they did, chances are they were either humanities majors writing papers, or they were computer science students who were at sort of the cutting edge of technology adoption. I got my first job through a combination of alumni connections and the fact that I was not afraid to use a computer. I was not what you would have called tech savvy when compared to anyone my own age. But I soon came to learn that I was light years ahead of most of the people in my workplace. So students, keep that in mind. The engineering office where I started my career was in the process of making the transition from hand-drawn plans to using AutoCAD. And for some, the technological divide was a bridge too far to cross. 10 years later, there were nearly 40 million websites. It was not unusual for grandparents to have computers and email. An upstart online bookseller called Amazon was well on its path to become the online retailing giant that it is. Google had just become the search engine of choice. And that phrase search engine didn't exist 10 years earlier. So let me be clear about that. As for me, the technological revolution allowed me to work remotely in Houston for the business school at University of Virginia, where amongst other things, I was serving as a TA in an e-business class, a term that had not existed 10 years earlier. The class was taught simultaneously between the business schools of UVA, University of Michigan, and University of California at Berkeley. And that technological change in that 10-year period reshaped how and where I worked and what was being taught in the classroom. So what I could not have predicted as a senior exactly how the world would, I couldn't have predicted how the world would look like in 10 years. There were several key meta trends that were already clear. Computers had become affordable. They were getting more powerful very quickly. There was already clear value in networking them together. I could already see that. And some activities were already moving into a digital environment. but the pace of change now is getting even faster. So there's a guy named Ray Kurzweil who predicts that we're going to experience 20,000 years of technological change over the next century, which is the same as going from the birth of the agricultural age to the birth of the internet age twice over. Not sure if it will work out quite that way or not, but that probably means that at least for you students, you may actually live to see the world 100 years from now, which is a remarkable thought. So let's look ahead. So I've given you a series of glimpses representing what we're seeing from companies, from countries, states, evolving technologies, even faith communities. So my first question, given the headlines we've discussed, how do you think our world, and in particular our built environment, will be different in 10 years? Now, don't feel overwhelmed by this question. One time, Barbara Bryson told me when I was facing a big question, eat the grizzly bear one bite at a time. And I said, Barbara, I don't eat grizzly bears. And she said, no. Break a big problem down into smaller components that you can manage, which was fantastic advice. So if you're thinking about how do I think about the world in 10 years, well, you could focus on one headline, for example, China prohibiting the sale of gas-powered cars by 2035, and start to imagine what that could mean. And you can make extrapolations, or you could do something like, say, I'm going to visualize a city block in Tucson, a block on Speedway. How is it going to look different 10 years from now with the changes that I've seen? So we're going to turn this into a conversation, and I'll have to let you know at some point during this conversation, I'm going to have to shift my laptop out into the lobby of this building to make way for a class. There are IT problems going on in the background here on the Rice University campus that you need not know the details of. So in the era of flexibility, you're just gonna have to work with me when you see me bobbing up and down like this because the laptop is bumping. But I wanna start a conversation, and I have two questions for you. So let's have an open conversation about this first one. What is the world going to look like in 10 years? And you can put your comments either in chat or you can unmute and speak up. This is meant to be a conversation. So who would like to start?
I think Barbara's got something.
So, Richard, one of the things that I put in my book was that I think we're about 8 years away from the first fully automated construction site. And so that entails mini robotics being used, drones being used. So there's delivery robotics, there's inspection robotics, there's labor robotics. And that doesn't mean that all construction sites will be unmanned, but it means that there will at least be experiments in unmanned construction sites. So what does that mean to labor? What does that mean to the sophistication of robotics? And what does it mean as far as the ability of robotics to invade other parts of our lives?
Well, that's exactly right. And so this is a great example because let's also think about what is this going to mean if you are performing inspections for the city of Tucson or permitting, or what is, how are regulatory bodies going to adjust to this? How, what is it going to mean for the contractors? Fantastic example. We've got one in the chat. And it was the thought that we will be living closer together. Thank you, Diane. Diane, do you want to jump in and add further comment to that?
Sure. I think that it's almost like a dual, let me put my video on, a dual sort of byproduct of the fact that we lived through what we did over the past year. And I think the impulse is strong to have human connection. It was always strong, but now more than ever. The other thing that happened, it seemed like, is communities came closer together and you saw a lot more cooperation and neighbors doing things for one another. And it was almost like sort of survival based on kind of these smaller systems. And I think there's an understanding that not only do we need each other, but we like things at a human scale. You see all over downtown Phoenix, walkability popping up, and you know, you can have an electric car, but you might as well walk around the corner. And I think there's going to be more of a demand for, at least I'm hearing that from other generations as well, just kind of density and sort of cooperation.
And if you don't mind me asking you a follow-up, do you see any enabling technologies necessary to allow that to happen? And I'm wondering in particular in a world where we might have perhaps more pandemics because of the leap of disease from the animal world to the human sphere.
I don't know if I can speak to that exactly, but I do think about supply chain relative to technology and the notion of things being distributed to individuals in a different manner, which would involve technology. I mean, there's only so much that, Amazon or these other companies can provide on a larger scale that, we might be seeing smaller distribution or large distribution systems, but kind of more of a middle ground for smaller distribution systems. So for example, big box stores doing what they did in a lot of kind of urban centers where real estate was at a premium, kind of a mini version of that, and just being more surgical in their networking. I guess that's technological, but
well, and so that actually, no, that's great. That leads into a comment that Chris Nelson shared. I'm pulling on the thread here about changes that you're imagining in distribution and flow of goods. And Chris poses the question: how will driverless cars affect travel behavior, and especially urban form? Some think it will put sprawl on steroids. Chris, do you want to jump in and give some further thoughts on driverless cars? Do you think that that we will own those cars, or do you think that it will be mobility as a service?
You have a couple hours?
No, you need to give a lightning answer.
So it depends on the generation. The older generations will want their personal vehicle. The younger ones will want their shared vehicle. But of course, as the older generations move on in life, the younger ones will dominate the shared vehicle. So I think that in 20 years or so, we'll see a mostly shared driverless vehicle world. Number two, we're assuming that driverless cars are going to be electric. But that, we need to confront that assumption. If they're, mostly not electric, and if we're going to be driving more because of driverless cars, robotic cars, that can undermine a lot of our positive signals that we're seeing. But of course, we're seeing all the automobile companies saying they'll be phasing out gasoline consumption engines by the 2030s. And so maybe it's a matter of writing that out. But I'll conclude by saying that I read these studies. There's no real studies. So there's a lot of simulation studies on the effect of driverless cars on travel behavior and location behavior, and they're done by engineers and mathematicians who don't do anything to look at human behavior. And what the results are showing is that we will see sprawl on steroids. But I'm in the real estate world, as well as some others here, and I'm in the behavioral world. And I'm thinking, if you don't need to own a car, and if you can just flip your phone and hail something and go anywhere you want, anytime you want, maybe more people would want to live closer in than farther away. We can convert, get this, we can convert 500 million parking spaces into productive real estate over the next 30 years. And we can unlock perhaps upwards of $20 trillion in new real estate development on parking lots in our cities and our suburbs and other centers. And we know from other studies, that's actually where people want to go. As a matter of fact, a commercial company, the CCIM magazine, earlier this week, reported a study showing that 80% of all adult Americans would want the opportunity to live in a mixed-use suburban setting. And that's nothing more than converting a strip center now from, basically being mostly vacant now and mostly asphalt, 80% asphalt now, into a mix of some retail, some office, some services, and residential. That's where the market is headed. And that's what the statisticians don't see when they're doing these takeoffs on driverless cars. So there's a whole lot of stuff we need to do in this field. We could own this field back, basically. And nobody's taking charge. Actually, Georgia Tech is taking charge, but they're engineers. They don't get it. We get it, but we could own this field.
So thinking in the context of the typical city block, you are unlocking lots more developable real estate with all of these parking spaces. And I feel like of these 500 million parking spaces that you mentioned, a good 50% of them are probably in Houston, which means that Houston could transform considerably. I also wanted to get to a question. I think it was Beth Weinstein asks it, and I think it's related something to Billy Faircloth also mentioned about boundaries and rethinking how and where we live near water. Yeah, I think we can think about our relationship to natural features in many ways. For those of us in Houston, there are moments where we think, thank God we're 50 miles inland. We wish we were 150 miles inland. There are going to be more of these kind of wild card events, that low probability but high impact when they happen, are highly disruptive. So what are thoughts about proximity to these sensitive spaces? Just as a follow-up to Beth's question. Speaking of boundaries, our coastlines will have shifted and we will be rethinking how we live near water, where water is, the shifts of settlement patterns and how we accommodate shifts in where we live and work because of these, yeah. And I'm scrolling through some other, oh, these are really fantastic. Hang on. Sorry, IT folks checking in on me. Okay, let's see. Kyle writes, shared autonomous electric vehicles will increase transportation access, reduce vehicle ownership, but he worries about exacerbating sprawl. Let's see. Jonathan writes, I am seeing our students choosing to spend the bulk of their time directing their design skills toward equity and climate action rather than formal innovation and individual social distinction. Oh, this is very interesting. So why don't we actually shift to our second question, because it's related to that last comment. And question 2 is, what do these broader changes mean for CAPLA and its students? So if the even the ordinary city block and the way that we build on that block might be totally different, the automated construction site, perhaps the disappearance of parking, the need to be concerned about the features that we build by, equity and climate issues to be sure. I've spent a lot of time looking at Lad Keith's work, knowing that we are dealing with rising temperatures in the cities, the urban heat island effect that is inequitably distributed. So what does this mean for CAPLA and its students? Who wants to jump in?
Well, I might try to get some things started here. I think what will be really necessary, and this is actually starting within the college, is conversations about our curriculum and how we have to keep reflecting on that curriculum to see how we're responding to this changing context that the students are going to end up practicing within. And it's incumbent upon us as educators and researchers to think about what we're doing in regards to this broader change which is occurring. And there's so many here present that are engaged in that conversation and thinking and reflecting upon what they teach and what they research in response to this context.
And I'd like to just add sort of maybe it's a hopeful note for students that ties back to the comment that I made about my own experience, is that they are going to be entering the workplace, and when they do so, they of course won't have the professional experience of those 5, 10 years, 20 years more mature in the field, but they're going to have an ingrained comfort in the latest technology that will just be second nature to them. And students, I will also say that you have hardwired into you a level of awareness and sensitivity to climate, and oftentimes to issues of equity and justice, that will put you ahead of some of those who are older than you. So you are going to be a valuable asset. And another thing I want to say, students, is if you think about all of these companies and governments and other organizations that are making these commitments, it's going to require jobs for people to enact these things. Each company is going to have a different climate action plan and different set of measures. And they're going to need folks like you to help make that happen. So it's going to require some potentially different skill sets. Who wants to jump in?
Hey, Richard, this is Billy Fairclough.
Hey, Billy.
Thanks so much for that. That prompt. It was really wonderful to see. I'm going to just confess that something I've been obsessed over for the last several weeks is the literature that is linking, planetary health to individuals and to human health, and that the work that I've seen on this is so compelling, but it's done through the biomedical sciences, and it's begging for us as designers to jump in and create the linkages and ask that hard question about precisely one that you're asking about. Where are we part of the conversation, and how do our design skills fit in? Where does the built environment fit into this discussion? But what's so true, and what I think about our students and our future, is that really trying to understand those linkages, as Howard Frumkin says, is so important. So at the planetary scale, we're exceeding all these boundaries, but at the individual scale, that's having such huge impacts, and it's very, very apparent in all the studies that are happening. There's a big challenge there for us that I think in our pedagogy we're positioned to really think through and understand and extend our discussion to an interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary mindset.
And Billy, you use a framing, I heard you say this one time, and it always stuck with me, in how you think about the now, the near future, and then the future, sort of drawing that distinction as helping to guide and sort actions and thoughts and measures. I believe Lad wanted to jump in. Is that right, Lad?
Sure. Thank you, Richard. Thank you for the more optimistic presentation than we often see about climate change. Appreciate that take on it. Yeah, so I teach the climate action planning course that's offered to students at the university. And I would say one thing is specifically increasing climate literacy and getting our students familiar with things like climate projections and understanding impacts from climate change. And so we've had students that have graduated and gone on to jobs where they've kind of admitted that they're the only person at their workplace, whether it's a city or a firm, that kind of knows how to access the National Climate Assessment and pull those localized climate projections. And so I think increasing that climate literacy across the board is a good thing. And whether it's in a specific class like the climate action planning class or integrated in other courses, and I'm thinking one thing we did for sustainable built environments with Adriana Zuniga's built environment history courses was look back at the history of how climate's impacted the built environment and really integrated that into their 2-semester experience. And so kind of showing them that climate isn't just a concern for today with climate change and increasing climate impacts, but climate has always impacted the built environment, and looking back at and seeing how, you know, our traditional architecture vernacular and all of those sorts of things have always traditionally used the environment and climate, you know, and when we do it well, have used it to their benefit. So,
and I just, you know, so lest I get the reputation of being the one who's sort of wildly optimistic, I want to position myself as cautiously optimistic based on the news that I'm seeing, but I like to come at it from sort of the, you know, the NASA viewpoint of failure is not an option. You know, and I've just been, you know, I've been really uplifted by, you know, so I mean, one way to view the pandemic is it's an environmental event as well. You know, when you have this sort of zoonotic leap as a result of humans getting into the habitat of animals, this is an environmental event. But it's like, you know, much in the way that we're going to view the world before and after with respect to the pandemic. I think this was also sort of the break point on climate action, and tying into some of these other comments, you know, Diane talking about this sort of this sense of responsibility, that's sort of growing responsibility with each other. Like, you know, we see it in the conversations that we have about the pandemic and our expectation that everyone is going to get vaccinated because it's going to protect all of us. Well, you know, I think there's sort of a similar logic that ties into the climate action. Yeah, thank you for sharing about what your class is doing. The lecture that, for those of you who don't know, Lad gave a fantastic virtual lecture to Rice, and one outcome of that is a project in a class that I'm assisting with. Some students are looking at the issue of the urban heat island on our campus and looking at a particular precinct of campus and what measures they can take to help mitigate that. You know, based on you know, some of the things that Lad raised in the presentation, which gets the importance of us sharing information with each other. So, getting back,
I think that Brian has a question there.
Oh, Brian, jump in. I can't see everybody.
Yeah,
Richard. Hi, Richard. Thank you for all of this, and this is definitely one of the more enthusiastic presentations I've seen. So I wouldn't be true to myself if I didn't introduce a note of cynicism. And it occurs to me that we've actually learned a lot of lessons about how human behavior responds to longer dated challenges. So if you take a look at where we are in dealing with COVID, maybe there are some generalizable lessons concerning even longer dated challenges like the impact of climate change. I think that we now know that in terms of relying on human behavior for us to do the right thing, we won't do the right thing. I think all we need to do is tune into what's going on in Miami Beach during spring break right now to realize that people are not going to change their behavior. And for all of the good news and all of the commitments that you started the program with, they are just that. They're commitments, they aren't binding. But it strikes me that the other prong of positivity that comes out of COVID is that the solution for COVID is not going to come from changing human behavior. It's going to come from technology. That the implementation of all of these vaccines is what people across the spectrum and across the globe have come to rely on in terms of bailing us out. Very much the same way when you read Bill Gates' new book, he doesn't really talk about relying on human behavior to do the right thing in terms of changing energy sources. He talks about technology being providing a deus ex machina, where a patentable solution just kind of pops out of a box. So I'm curious what the group thinks, whether we really can live up to all of those commitments, or whether we're going to have to rely on that deus ex machina solution in terms of breakthrough battery storage technologies, for example.
I do think that we will be relying heavily on the technology lever, if you will. I think just what's going on in the world of lab-grown and cultured meats alone is one of those almost silver bullets if it happens. I'm not so optimistic at the personal scale of behavior, but at a broader scale and how people. I'll lean a little bit on what we're seeing from Lloyd's, the fear of investing in something that could prove to be a very risky investment and how that could affect their returns and what sort of liabilities they might expose them to. So it's not exactly looking out for themselves, but looking out for their money. It's those sort of broader flows that that actually have me pretty optimistic as well. Let me see, we have something that popped up in the chat here. Let's see. So Brian posed that question broadly. I realized that we're about 2 minutes from a hard stop. Gina, do we have time for anyone else to jump in, or is it?
We have time for another question, and then we'll wrap up.
And I will say, I realize that this is going to be, these are questions where answers are going to occur to you and thoughts are going to occur to you as you're walking the dog, as you're taking a shower over the coming days and weeks. I want to invite anyone and everyone. You can send me your thoughts at sustainability@rice.edu, and I'll collect them and I'll share them back through Kay if we've got enough worth sharing, just so we have them memorialized in one place, and maybe we'll figure out a way to distribute them back out to everyone. But don't be afraid to let me know what you think. Anyone want to jump in with a last question or comment?
I don't see any hands up at the moment, so
there was another comment from Christy, sorry.
Yes, what is it?
Building institutional capacity to support young people who may be coming into university angry, resentful, and grieving their future.
No. That's a powerful statement, but one thing that I'll say is that when you read some of the literature from futurists, they don't refer to futures singularly, they refer to it plural, futures. And there are multiple pathways, and we have some ability and agency to select pathways. And what I like to, what I started off my class with this semester, Sustainable Futures, was the famous Kennedy, "We want to go to the moon" speech, which happened on the Rice campus, where Kennedy chose a particular pathway and said, that's the goal we want to hit. At that time, the technology had not been invented, and he had a time frame of less than 10 years for achieving a particular outcome. But with the goal clearly stated, getting a man to the moon safely and returning them to Earth, and combined with the resources to make it happen, it turned it from one of many possible futures to the future that became the reality. And so I personally try not to get into the space of grieving or mourning futures, because there are multiple futures that we can collectively try to work towards, and between the social movements and the technological change, I think that the band of positive futures that we can move into is expanding And I'm, you know, I'm thinking that then we're moving a little further away from the negative side. So that's, maybe I'm a little too optimistic, but.
I love it though, Richard. Thank you. This has been the most uplifting presentation I've seen all week. And I think there's a lot you can do with optimism. It's going in the right direction, isn't it? So I do hope you share your presentation with us. I think it would help lift a lot of people's spirits during this continued remote work scenario.
Thank you, Carrie. It's so good to see you.
Yeah, sorry, I was eating a salad and slapping salad dressing all over me.
This presentation was recorded and will be posted on the CAPLA website probably within the week. Thank you all for attending and participating to such an extent. And thank you, Richard, for that very uplifting look at our future, our climate future, and really appreciate your time today in joining us. Thank you.
So Gina, if I could just say one thing, just to Richard, thank you, Richard, for coming up with this idea and for us to continue these conversations is just what we need. But I also know, just on the theme of optimism, I think that's where creativity lies. And it's important to have a good bit of optimism as you innovate. And so it's good to hear this presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
all.
very much.
Thanks for engaging. We'll be in touch. Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.